Welcome to another episode. This week's episode of Off World Off Topic. This week, as every week, I'm joined by Sam Paler. I'm Mark Fox Powell, and this is Off World Empire's weekly show.
It is indeed episode 11.
Yeah, to the double digits for the second time.
For the second time.
Yeah, we're gonna. Anyway, so what this week we're going to be tackling the tasty subject of consciousness.
The hard problem, if you like, of consciousness.
We kind of touched on it a bit last week.
Yeah, we did.
But after talking about it a bit further, we're like, let's just jump in. I think we had a few people like talking about it on comments.
Yeah,
and
we
stuff as well.
did.
So we thought like
someone mentioned
dive in.
Should do it as an episode, and there'll be one or two overlaps from last week's.
Yeah.
And maybe overlaps into when we eventually do an AI episode.
Yeah.
But
which is
I think
somewhere on the horizon.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think it's a good time to tackle it based on where we are in terms of what we've done recently.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I think it's sort of logically the next thing we need to talk about in detail.
So I guess the kind of question that we're trying to address, which is a bit broad and vague, is what is consciousness?
Yes.
Which is a bit of a head fuck problem.
Head fucking.
Yes,
it is.
You know what I mean? It's just a bit of a it's a weird one when you.
It is, and actually, thinking about it is not easy.
No, it's not.
It's very difficult.
Yes.
It's very easy to trip yourself up on things.
We've been spending the last few hours trying to think about what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
And it's just like these concepts are hard to get your head around.
It is.
But yeah, we'll do our best.
Yeah, we will. But first, let's talk about some comments.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So I thought one comment that was quite interesting that we had. Was related to when we were talking about the types of intelligence you might get evolving on a planet or on our planet that might, say, replace us.
Yeah, so this is about when we were talking about the evolution of human intelligence on that video,
I think it's actually from the video where we talk about would aliens be humanoid looking.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, the comments related to the development of intelligence. Whether it's closer to whether it would develop twice on one planet or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And specifically about octopus. Okay.
Yes.
So the comment was from Mo Ryan or Moo Ryan, not sure how you say that, but whatever. Yeah. And he or she basically said, what if we breed a species of octopus where the mothers did not starve themselves? So as far as I know, that happens I think it happens in most, if not all, octopus species.
Yeah, I think so. So the parent or the mother will lay a bunch of eggs.
Yeah.
And like keep watch over them at the cost of her own life, basically.
Yes.
Because she sacrifices herself to ensure that they will hatch.
Yeah. Every time.
Yeah. Every time, I think. Yeah.
Exactly. She only has she rears one set of young essentially, and then dies.
So the point is that, as we talked about in that episode, that octopus are like probably very intelligent and like good at problem solving and like do all this crazy stuff during their lives, but they're not able to pass any of that information that they learn on to the next generation because they die before the next generation.
That's the premise essentially. Yeah. So he suggests what happens if they could survive to reproduce again. Would you get higher intelligence evolving rapidly? Could we, for example, get males to bring food to them, etc., to the females? You know, that sort of thing. Like try and either breed in that behaviour or do some sort of genetic modification that engenders that behavioural change. Yeah. What would come out of doing that to an octopus? So could we with that change, would that be enough to potentially start like an intelligence revolution?
Like a runaway kind of like almost not an arms race, but a runaway like increase in intelligence like we saw.
Is that the only thing holding them back essentially from being from developing to our level of intelligence?
It's certainly a barrier to it. Yeah, like if there's a need in their environment for like intelligence on the level of like complex intelligence like you see in like primates and human-like primates, humans. If there's a need for that in that environment, and that will allow them to exploit the environment better, which it probably would.
Then they don't die?
Yeah. Then the fact that they can't pass on information to their offspring is definitely like a barrier to that happening.
Yes, it is.
But if you remove that barrier, it would just automatically start happening. I'm not sure.
I don't think it would.
No.
It automatically start happening.
No.
But it may eventually. It may be one of the barriers that you bring down that engenders that type of race to like an intelligence race to start happening. So you would need you probably need a more sort of octopus aren't particularly social. They don't live in big social groups.
That's
they
a good
don't
point.
really have to understand a huge amount about. Maybe they do have to understand a bit about kind of what other octopus are kind of like doing and thinking and stuff, but it's not to the same level that you got. That seems to be a big part of the human intelligence arms race, is that we had to very quickly understand more and more complex social groups.
Yeah, so we were interacting with other humans that were just as
bigger
complex
and
as you,
bigger
as
and
we
bigger
were.
and bigger groups.
In much bigger groups. Yeah. So that's the whole like social brain hypothesis of like how intelligence began to become so like just run away increase. And octopus don't really live in that situation. They're quite solitary.
I think so, largely. Yeah. They're definitely, there's not like big kind of social groups of octopus. I'm pretty sure there are.
Yeah, sure.
So there'd need to be other kind of developments and other changes probably in their biology.
Yeah.
They might, we don't know much about kind of how their brain would become, like whether you, with that body shape and that body model without a large centralized brain, instead you have like nodes and a different system, whether you can actually get to human level intelligence with that body plan. Maybe you can. No reason necessarily why you couldn't. It's just we don't really know exactly.
Yeah. But so, maybe something like living in larger and larger groups would be something that emerges after you allow them to start. Maybe one generation will pass on the information that it's better if 2 of you go and do this together, or 6 of you go and do this together, or something. Maybe, but you also need the environmental like selection pressures as well. Yeah. For it, and like maybe just like the situation with like predators and prey situations and stuff like that in the grasslands where the humans evolved was just right at the time. Yeah, sure. And it wouldn't be the case maybe with octopus living amongst like coral and stuff, whatever they do, just hiding away.
Yeah, possibly. We don't know. That was an environmental change. I guess forcing them to no longer die might be like a big enough change in itself to start something like that. Because they would probably, if they're going to die after raising their young may like start be living in bigger groups basically, because they have like families basically. Yeah, I love the idea of like a big group of octopus, just sort of like a tribe of octopus. Yeah. I don't know what the collective term for octopus is. I don't even know if there is one. There should be one. I don't know. Can't think. Yeah, I'm trying to think of words beginning with O. An octagon. No, it doesn't really work. Like an octoposse. Just a posse of octopus. I don't even know what the plural of octopus is. Is it just octopus? Octopuses. Octopoles. So back on track. That would probably, I think, that would probably be a necessity in their development if they wanted to become more intelligent to pass down information. They'd obviously have to learn like a lot more about like tool use and language and these kinds of things to record any information they have in order to get really smart. They do show some tool use, rudimentary tool use. They do, like getting coconuts and stuff and do bits and bobs. But there would have to be a lot of other like fortuitous things to develop as well. Yeah. For them to become if they had civilization building style. Sure. But actually, weirdly, like what we identified, or I say identified, what we sort of like decided between the two of us was like the most crucial factor in human civilization building like ability was the conjunction of complex language and tool use that enables you to record that language to pass it down. Yeah. So like, technology. That conjunction of complex language and technology to record that language. The fact that the octopus die before their offspring are born actually is not a barrier to that happening. Like you could actually have it's not. That's very true. That same system emerge if the brain power is enough, or if they had the right abilities with tools or whatever, and the right enough like complexity in their language to decide that they wanted to do that. Although there's obviously no immediate benefit to the living octopus. Other like octopus who aren't mothers or the father or something would have to do the I don't know if you'd have to teach these young octopus to be able to read what's been left over. That's very true. Yeah. So you can record a lot of information. Yeah, it still is a barrier. Yeah. Teaching young octopus. It's like a little octopus school. They're all like sat behind desks, like with 8 computers. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting scenario. I think I think you'll find that with any of these potential barriers to becoming like civilization building, that there's not one barrier.
It's not one barrier. It's
and
not like...
there's loads of things that have to co-evolve at once, in order to get something like us, or something as intelligent as us.
But the comment said like, could we, should we?
Yeah.
Like, the should we part of that is like kind of refers back to some of the stuff we were talking about, in the sense that should we interfere with like the evolution of something in order to funnel it towards like a civilization building kind of trait, almost as a kind of an experiment. Like, okay, what do you need? What's the minimum set of requirements you need, or under what situations can you get these kind of intelligences emerging? And maybe this is a kind of slightly not unethical, but it's like just kind of slightly,
I don't know, is it
ethically questionable experiment? Maybe it's not.
Well, it depends what you have to do to the octopus and stuff, and depends, if it causes some horrible harm to them, or...
Well, you're basically just keeping them alive longer. So
yeah, but you'd have to do loads of experiments to try and get that to work to start with.
Yeah, maybe.
So you just like
you
don't have like.
Or you just feed them while they're keeping their kids alive, keeping their eggs safe.
You might find they won't eat.
Yeah, it's just it's just innate in them. They just sit there and chill.
I presume that's been. I guess people have tried that. Just feed it for God's sake.
Yeah, keep it alive.
Like you said, like make the male do the. Because he's just buggered off. I think they die, actually, the males, after they mate or something as well.
Well, they certainly don't hang around. They're not like parenting in the way that like mammals, do, or birds or whatever. Some mammals, some birds.
But get the male to do the heavy lifting. Go get some food for Christ's sake.
Stuff, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Should we do it?
Should we? Yeah.
The least considered answer ever.
Of course.
Yeah.
Probably.
I don't know. I'm not against it.
I'm not against it either.
I don't really want to...
I can't see how... Unless, as you said, unless it's like torturously harmful to the octopus.
Yeah. I don't know how you'd go about trying to change that behaviour. You probably can't.
Yeah. If it requires like... I don't know what I was going to say. I was going to say it requires loads of genetic engineering, but then,
That might be a useful thing to try and develop.
It might be a useful thing to try and develop, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably insanely complex. Like, the genetic basis of a behaviour like that is just...
Insane,
insane.
Again, like the same with intelligence, there's probably loads of different cofactors that mean that they have to do that or they develop that behaviour.
Yeah.
And then you've got to try and like make... I guess you just sort of release them into the wild and see if they start developing kind of like family groups and more social groups.
Yeah.
Rather than like sort of trying to then get them to like teach their young. Because obviously the octopus has no like... If it dies before the young are born, it has no. Not only does it have like, not only is this barrier dying, but it has absolutely like no ingrained parenting abilities or anything like that.
It has no incentive to teach the next generation either. Like it needs to evolve that incentive.
Yes.
But that incentive has emerged in other animals because it serves like a purpose. Like because there's a selective advantage to doing that.
Yeah.
It's not like the first octopus to live to see its own young.
No.
Will just immediately be like, I need to teach it like how to sit inside this little shell or whatever.
No, exactly.
They're just gonna be like, what the hell are these things? Let's eat them.
Yeah, they might just eat them.
Yeah.
You might find that if you let it survive long enough, all it does is eat them because it doesn't understand what they are. Yeah. Who knows? But anyway, cool comment. Thank you for
definitely cool. Good to think about.
Yeah. So let's move on.
Yeah.
To the main event.
Here we go. What is consciousness? What is it?
Just like one word answer.
Yeah.
See you later.
So we're gonna try and tackle it like as like a physical phenomenon, like as like a part of the. This is part, as we've said in the last couple of episodes. It's a part of the universe, like a property of the universe, something that's emerged given the laws of physics that we have in this universe.
Yes, as people. Yes, yeah.
I think that's the way we're.
The kind of physical, non-physical arguments do come up, though. That we aren't going to necessarily just dismiss. But it's worth talking about, kind of like what do we mean by sort of saying consciousness?
Yeah. What does that word actually mean?
Yeah, and I mean
who knows?
And actually, the more you get into this, the more that with theories like integrated information theory and that sort of stuff. It's like the original meaning of consciousness sort of doesn't mean anything anymore. Really.
Yeah.
Like
it turns into a much more like functional definition rather than.
It changes a lot.
Yeah.
Like hugely.
Yeah. And I actually like thinking about all this stuff and talking about it, and I find I I don't really like using the word consciousness that much.
No.
Just because it's loaded with...
It has connotations.
Yeah. It means lots of things to different people, and
yeah,
immediately gets people thinking down possibly the wrong track, or possibly like a misleading track from what you want them to be thinking, or what you hope to convince them of, or whatever.
So what do we mean by consciousness?
Anyway,
we sort of mean sentience.
Sentience. So sentience is something you can look up, and has quite a simple definition, which is something like the ability to have a subjective experience. Yeah. Basically. So the fact
it's self-awareness.
Self-awareness comes into it. Yeah, like the fact
having internalized thoughts.
Yeah.
About things that are not happening around you. So for example, I can think up a thought of, I don't know, you beating up some ducks or something.
Fair. It's just a thought,
but that's not
happen.
No. But I can just randomly visualize that in my head.
Yeah. And just the fact that your experience of the universe, of the world right now is separate from mine. Like you're having a subjective experience, which is which is unique to you. Yeah. And I'm having one that's unique to me.
Yeah.
So that's
and the viewer is having one that's unique to them.
Yes. So that's it. That's it, right? Sentience is
yes. That's kind of what we're going to be working with as our kind of what we mean by talking about when we're talking about consciousness. Yeah. Again, we'll talk about and get through how it gets more muddy, etc., etc. But that's largely our kind of basis for it.
Yeah. So an awareness of self and ability to experience.
So some of the more old school kind of comments and thoughts and ideas about consciousness tend to revolve around, and we did this really last week in terms of humans being like a special kind of thing and having a life force or a sort of soul or something in them. Yeah. That either people said didn't exist in animals, or was like a uniquely human thing, or maybe did exist in animals, but there was like a force, like consciousness was kind of like a.
That's probably because for a long time, only until very recently, science has kind of stepped back from it a bit, and the people in the groups trying to do the most explaining about what consciousness were religious groups mainly, and like superstitious groups and things like that. Those were the explanations coming out were along the religious lines, and have been for like thousands of years. So like concepts of afterlife and things like that, like the separation of mind and body, like the fact that yourself, like your personality, or your mind is something that you could separate from your brain and from your body, and could float off and go somewhere else. And like that idea is rooted in like religion and superstition and all that kind of stuff. Yes, exactly.
And we're gonna try and take a more kind of measured approach. We're gonna try and use things based on at least some kind of evidence or theoretical basis for some of this stuff. There's no real theoretical basis for things like a soul. There's no reason to suspect that that's really like a thing that's worth discussing.
The links between like consciousness and the physical brain, there is a lot of evidence for that.
There is a huge
those two things are like intrinsically, like the fact that you can like destroy parts of the brain and the person becomes less conscious. Yeah, like you can have someone who's basically brain dead from like horrendous brain injuries. Just goes to that's pretty strong evidence that like the mind, the soul, or the conscious being is one and the same thing as the brain. Like they're inseparable. Yes. Whereas there isn't really any evidence that there's like an extra like force or like entity that might be described separately.
And it's easy to think that because it does sort of feel like there is.
Yeah, it totally does. It feels like you're kind of sat inside this like sort of vehicle.
You sort of know yourself and all these kinds of things, and there's reasons why that you might feel that way in terms of we'll talk about integrated information, these types of things later. Yeah. But there's no evidence really that there's a if you consider the physical world to be you basically don't believe in anything like superstitious or supernatural basically. Yeah. Then if you believe that, then that's fine, but that you can't really do much with that at that point.
Exactly,
because you can throw in any idea.
Yeah, and what we'll find as we go through this is that you don't need to invoke anything like that really
don't.
to explain
There's
it.
absolutely no
There are, you can build explanations for what's going on based purely on like the laws of physics and the physical world, and actually to introduce like an extra component of like some mysterious force just complicates things further and like requires like a whole extra load of stuff to be true. Like basically like a whole branch of science that we don't even really know about right now needs to exist for there to be like an extra like sort of supernatural kind of soul.
That's a good way of putting it. There's other. So we talked about some of the stuff last week about the link between animals and humans. And how there's kind of good evidence in evolution that really there's no kind of distinction between humans and animals, and it makes no sense whatsoever to have consciousness kind of imbued into some kind of humanoid at some point in human development. This it doesn't make no sense that like consciousness was like just somehow suddenly formed, some sort of physical force formed in that particular animal, which took hold as kind of this self-awareness thing. It's just it makes no sense.
It's very hard. It's very hard. It's impossible to pick the point at which, like, if someone's suggesting that that's true, that like that there is a physical force to consciousness, then they would have to identify where in evolution that force
which baby
appeared.
It was born into.
Yes, exactly. Which is difficult.
Well, it doesn't. It makes no sense because at no point was a human like, anatomically modern or not. There was no like distinct like day that happened or person that happened in.
Yeah, I guess people maybe would say that it's evolved like a trait like wings or like eyes. So that not all animals, not all organisms have eyes. But then you can trace back eyes right back to rudimentary like molecular
and you can trace back everything that's involved in consciousness that we know if we damage or switch off. We can see those structures going back. So just the evolution of brains, for example, we know when brains have first appeared in certain animals. We can see them reappear in lineages that didn't have them originally, separate from lineages that do have them, so brains or neurons actually. So there's no reason to suspect that
like suddenly now from now on like everything now has this like thing, this force, this like soul or whatever.
But you can definitely argue, and I agree, that we are much more aware, much more self-aware and aware of ourselves, our position in the universe, etc., than any other animal.
Yes,
we're definitely we're significantly more capable of those types of thoughts, and so therefore you could say
that we're more conscious.
And you could say we're significantly more conscious.
Yes.
But it would make no sense to say that animals are unconscious and we are conscious.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, the very fact that we can actually have a conversation about whether or not we're conscious and what consciousness is. Yeah. It means we're more conscious than like a dog or something. Yeah. Because the dog's not thinking about. Maybe a dog is thinking about this stuff.
Probably not.
No. But yeah. So anyway. So even though you're right that it's impossible to find a point at which this force would have appeared, there are still plenty of people like contemporary like philosophers and stuff who argue that there must be something else beyond just like the physical brain and the physical processes. There must be. So there's that thing.
So non-physical.
It's like a non-physical. There must be like a non-physical aspect to consciousness. Like consciousness is like more than the sum of its parts, basically. Yeah. Like the philosophical zombie argument or whatever.
That's quite a cool thought experiment. Yeah. So we should probably explain that.
Yes. And,
a philosophical zombie is basically like behaves and acts in an identical way to a human. It is a human, but it doesn't have consciousness. Yes. So it's not. So if you stab it with something, it reacts to pain. It behaves in a totally in every way. It physically is a human, but it doesn't have consciousness.
Yeah. Which is interesting.
It's sort of an illusion of its.
It's like a simulation of a human, basically, isn't it? Kind of.
Yes.
Like it's like something that's been built to impersonate a human in every way. Yeah. But has no consciousness. Yeah. And like the kind of the physicalism argument, which is the standpoint that all consciousness is something that emerges from physical processes in the brain. Yes. Would say that.
And underneath, there's like multiple, like materialism's like one type of physicalism.
Yeah, sure. But the physicalist standpoint would be that, okay, if you've recreated something that is doing everything that a human does, then you've recreated a human and it's conscious. Like a philosophical zombie just couldn't exist.
Yes.
would be the physicalist standpoint.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't like the philosophical zombie thingy. It's a cool thing to think about.
It is, yeah.
It's clearly a circular argument. It's clearly the whole premise of it is that if you have something physically identical to a human, that you can then have something that's not a human.
Yeah.
And that's the thing it's trying to prove in the first place. So it's a circular argument.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not. It's just not a realistic kind of way to look at the world. It's kind of
there's some strange logic involved in it as well that I got to admit I just do not understand.
That you assume parts of it are true because you can talk.
Yeah, the fact that you can imagine a world that exists where like consciousness is separate. Like you can the fact that you can imagine a philosophical zombie means that physicalism is wrong or something like that. There's some weird
metaphysically
logical argument that I just do not follow at all.
You find that in you'll get that in philosophy occasionally. Logical like linguistic arguments that say like you're talking about these types of things, therefore these things are true, therefore this is true.
Yeah.
But like it's bollocks. I mean,
maybe this is like my bias coming into it as a scientist. And I see something like that, and I think of it from a scientific standpoint. Was where its use is actually less. It's not trying to explain. It's not trying to say like this is reality. It's just trying to like start a discussion or like try and get other people to kind of argue, to find the holes in it and like say, okay, so this makes logical sense as a logical statement.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually work in the universe. So
why is that?
Yeah, maybe that's true.
Maybe there's some use to it in that sense that I don't quite understand.
I mean, it's good to provoke debate. So
sure,
that's fine.
It's a good little thought.
I get the impression that that's not always the purpose of this. That's like comes across sometimes as a like a proper argument that they think is like a way of you're going to better understand the universe by following this like set of rules, and that doesn't seem to have much success in explaining the universe or helping us understand it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the whole like road.
Yeah, sure. But basically the point is that there are still plenty of people out there who wouldn't consider themselves religious, believe in like a religious like ideal of a soul, but still think that there's an aspect of consciousness that can't be explained just by the brain,
just by biology, and physical chemistry and stuff. No, absolutely,
But as we've been saying, like that's hard to reconcile with the evolution of consciousness and the fact that there's no evidence for it. There's no actual empirical scientific evidence that such a thing exists.
Fuck all.
Yeah, absolutely nothing. But having said all that, it may still be useful to consider consciousness as like a separate thing, purely for the standpoint of understanding it, right? And I don't mean a separate thing like a something that you float out of your head and float away into the clouds, like becomes separate from you.
Yes.
But just as a way of like defining like a particular process that's distinct from other processes.
Yes, or the outcome of a particular set of processes or something. Yeah, sure.
Exactly.
Absolutely,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like
for example, like a brain is clearly doing something different to a lump of meat that's been cooked. Like it's clearly some other stuff that defines it as different, and that like what we're describing as consciousness is perhaps one aspect of something that defines it as like a different type of system.
Yes, exactly. And like an analogy that possibly works, possibly doesn't, but is if you think about like a hurricane.
Yeah.
So like a hurricane is just a really, really like high energy system of like temperature changes and fast air movements and stuff like that, and like moisture, humidity going all over the place.
Yeah.
That actually when you break it down is just the same kind of processes that are happening all over the planet all the time, like air moving, temperatures changing, whatever. But it's useful for our understanding of it to classify it as a particular thing, and we think of it as a discrete thing. Okay, that right there is a hurricane.
Yes.
Right, and it's different from all the air over there and all the other stuff that's over there.
Yeah.
And it exists, and there it is.
And it's measurable. It's quantifiable.
Yeah. So if you think about like the hurricane is consciousness, so like all the processes that are happening that build consciousness are nothing special particularly. They're happening all over the place, like the transfer of energy and like I don't know, like
electrical energy,
whatever. Like information being transferred. And we'll get into this in a minute.
Yeah.
That all that stuff is pretty mundane, and there's nothing special about it. But it's useful from the standpoint of understanding it to describe it as like, okay, this is a particular system. This is a particular thing called consciousness or called sentience or whatever. maybe.
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
that's the merit in thinking of it as a thing.
And that maybe in the same way you could take a thunderstorm and it kind of develops into, it has a swirling pattern, it has these areas of low pressure, and it's kind of like a proto-hurricane if it's got enough. So maybe some types of like animal consciousness, you going back to like bacteria, are kind of like that thunderstorm.
Yeah.
And that when they get to us, the conscious system is suddenly like has to be way more complex and hierarchical and structured in a way that a hurricane, it sort of is.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like an evolution above. There's more energy and more stuff going on in a hurricane than a thunderstorm. It becomes like a more defined like object.
Yeah. And in the same way that
I mean, maybe that's a bad analogy, but it's
yeah. I mean, it kind of works. Like, just don't look too closely at it.
yeah. Don't look too close.
Like all of these things, like it is hard to find like a good analogy for stuff like something like consciousness, because there's just nothing else quite like
it's super hard
in the universe, really. But
as far as we know,
well, yeah.
Nothing else we see on Earth.
Yeah. So if you think about like consciousness, sentience, as something that it's just sort of a way of processing information, or like an outcome of information processing.
Seemingly,
it's you can sort of see how such a thing is very useful for survival, like for animal survival, and how it could have been honed. Like self-awareness could be something absolutely that gets selected for and honed by evolution, just because
think of the benefits of doing that. Like which animal's going to be able to survive more? One that understands its kind of place in an environment, or one that doesn't have a clue what's going on?
Yeah, and just like it's just like a little machine, like reacting to.
Yeah, it's getting hit. It just reacts to stimuli. It's just like terrified and hit. Of course, the more cognizant you are.
Yeah, like the fact that you can remember stuff and plan for the future and all this kind of stuff. Like, even in the most basic sense, like all of that is going to be like massively beneficial. Yeah. So like easy to see how such a thing could be honed by evolution. Yes,
and take a very long time. Is very complicated and chaotic and crazy system, but it's just a possibly something you would find in every biosphere, if there's such thing. If life is all like that, you would potentially find a way of centralizing like processing in an organism in order for it to understand and react to its environment, and then potentially like think more about its environment in the future, and other environments that it's not yet seen, and kind of and then understand other organisms, understand itself. It's just a probably just a feature of
it is, and we're often persuaded or like encouraged to not think that there's like an inevitable like consequence of evolution or whatever, but maybe given enough time and enough stability, that like something like this is sort of
an outcome.
I don't want to use the word inevitable, because that's like an absolute,
it might be statistically but likely.
Yeah, statistically likely, given enough stability, given enough time, and obviously you need stuff like enough energy, so like oxygen in the atmosphere and all that kind of shit. But maybe,
quite possibly. So I think one of the leading theories at the moment, then we probably might as well talk about integrated information, is this thing called integrated information theory, which is a really interesting of way to look at consciousness, a very objective way. But the key thing with it is it tries to quantify consciousness, which has never really been tried before in the same way. There may have been like other proto-theories and types of things, maybe. Yeah. But, this is the first one, I think, to make a really like serious effort to put numbers on consciousness, and really,
or at least to take the first step to putting numbers on it.
Yes, yeah.
What they describe sounds like it's a quantitative system, and it sort of is, but they don't actually, as far as I can tell, they don't actually like put forward any way of actually.
No, they're hypothesizing of a method of doing it.
Yeah, sure. You can kind of think of it.
When was the first paper on it? It was like 2009 or something.
Yeah, something that's pretty recent.
It's quite recent, so it's a fairly recent thing that's started to gain more traction actually over the years. Yeah.
And this one of you guys pointed this out in a comment.
Oh yes, someone did.
Integrated information theory. Yeah. And like we'd heard about it before, but like that we definitely decided to dive into it again after seeing the comment. So cheers for that.
Connor Healy.
Yeah.
Thank you for that comment.
Yeah. And so you can kind of think of integrated information theory as a it was just a mouthful.
It is. You can call it IIT.
IIT.
I'm not sure. I keep getting that fumbled as well, though. IIT. Integrated information. I don't know a quick way of saying that. Anyway, let's just roll with integrated information.
Oh, God, and the language they use when you read some of those papers as well. Like, what is it? The intrinsically irreducible, like...
Yeah.
I can't remember.
And to be honest, once you get your head around what they mean, they're okay. It's just when you first start reading it, it's like...
So I think
like anything, when you get into it to start with, it takes a while to get used to the lingo.
Yeah. So integrated information theory, you can kind of think of it, or at least I kind of think of it as a way of almost redefining what consciousness is, right?
Yes.
And I don't mean redefining it from like what we described it as at the beginning of this, because consciousness as we experience it is still like sentience and self-awareness and all that stuff. But integrated information theory it's trying to explain how such a trait could emerge purely from like information processing.
Yes. Yeah.
In the most basic sense.
Yes. So how a system begins to take on characteristics like self-awareness.
Yeah.
Based on this kind of metric, what they call phi, which is how integrated...
It's like a Greek letter, phi.
Yeah. How integrated the information in a system is.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite difficult to explain.
Yeah, so so if you think of information as purely just like the state of something that affects like an outcome. So like for example, like the way light is reflected off of something is that's a way of like information being transferred.
Yes, yeah.
Sure. So that thing, the state of that thing has affected the way that light's been reflected.
Yeah.
So like you can also think about like obviously
as particle or whatever.
Yeah, or so and taking it to the brain, like the way that certain neurons are like connected and the way that they fire.
Yes.
That's obvious. I mean, that's much more intuitively like that's carrying information.
Yeah.
Or like compute like bits in a computer.
Yeah, exactly.
Cascade of information, whatever. And the integrated part of it is the crucial thing. Like that's the absolutely crucial thing. So you can have a shitload of information.
Yeah.
Like a computer, like just churning through, just processing a ton of information.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's integrated is like the really, really crucial part that brings you this like level of this thing called phi, and like high levels of phi mean high levels of consciousness. And so we have like we have the highest level of phi. Yeah. Our brains are the highest phi thing.
Most phi rich
in the universe.
Objects.
Yeah, exactly. Delicious phi.
Yes, yeah.
So kind of analogy. I don't know. Again, like how well this was. I read this one, and it kind of holds. So like, if you imagine like you looking at a photo of an apple, and a camera. So a camera seeing an apple and you seeing an apple. The inputs are basically the same in the sense that like the light is going into the camera, and the light's going in your brain, like turn into digital images, whatever in your brain or in the camera. But in your brain, the integrated part of it comes from the fact that you're seeing the light, so you're seeing like the physical object in front of you, but you're also using like memories of what apples are, like knowledge that it's food, like maybe like the fact that it's red like does something else. So all of this stuff
where it's come from, tree, you know,
all of this stuff is integrated together to give you the conscious experience of seeing the apple. Yeah. Whereas all the camera has is a bunch of like pixel data, like amount of colors per pixel or whatever. Yeah. And it's not integrated information. You could like chop out a section of that picture and it would make just as much sense to the camera as the whole, you know, whereas your conscious experience of seeing that apple depends on all of those different things.
If you change the color of the apple. Yeah. If you made a pink apple. Yeah. Then I've got more information on that object as an apple than the camera has, and can store about what the apple is to so the camera just takes a picture and it takes a picture. Yeah. I look at it, I take like a mental picture and go, apple's pink. It's not right. Or I get hungry or whatever. So
the crucial thing is having integrated information, and like they describe it in the sense that, I mean, it's the language they use is mental, but it's like you can't, like the information isn't divisible. Like that's the crucial. That's the crucial thing.
It's a complex.
It's a complex that's totally interdependent.
Yeah, and so if you pull one bit of it out, it no longer makes sense as like an entire structure. Yeah, but basically, pull any part of that system out, and the whole thing doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
The integration is the key part, and if you take one bit of it out, you won't understand the whole. That kind of concept.
Yeah. So you could have a computer that's like the most powerful like supercomputer in the world and just plows through data, just like crunching numbers. Yeah. But it's still like just in series, just churning through numbers. Yeah. It's not building up a structure of data of information that's all codependent on each other in its computery mind.
Yes. Yeah.
This is really hard to talk about.
I think that makes sense
to explain. But yeah, the
key thing is that you have modular parts that all feed into each other and all do different bits, and the information. Like, you get more information the more integrated, the more interconnected, the more different parts relate to other parts. Yeah. If you pull any of those parts away, then you end up with less you don't end up with integrated information. You end up with disparate parts that are no longer integrated, and that moves you closer to understanding what consciousness might like exist from,
emerge from, not emerge from, because that still makes it sound like it's a thing that comes out of it, but just like when you have something that has a high level of integrated information, you have a conscious system.
Yeah, that's what it posits. Yeah.
So that also means that anything. So if you extrapolate this all the way, like as far as it will go, you basically find that anything that has any form of information, like transferring capacity, has like a non-zero level of phi. And like by information transferring capacity, I mean it's basically anything in the entire universe.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that people tend to kind of latch onto about integrated information theory, is that it kind of says that consciousness is kind of everywhere and in everything.
Yes.
But that's not kind of really what it means.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't mean that in the classic...
It doesn't mean that in the classical sense of what people think consciousness is, or would consider consciousness to be. So because you've got these different, like... we're talking about these integration of different things. The more integrated it becomes, the more conscious it becomes. But that, like you said, you can't reduce that level to zero. There's no non-phi level of zero, because there's always some information that is somewhat integrated between like maybe a couple of particles or something like that.
Yeah.
Or not, is essentially non-zero in everything. So a photon has a level, according to this, a level of consciousness.
Yeah.
As does your iPhone, as does your lamp, as does your whatever.
But it's wrong to think about it as like, okay, that's got a rudimentary version of what we've got. That's the wrong way of thinking about it. It's much more accurate to think that what we've got is a much like crazy more complicated version of information transfer, rather than the other way around, if you see what I mean.
Kind of, yeah. So, yeah.
Which is the problem with using the word consciousness to talk about it.
The problem with the word consciousness is that traditionally it invokes... Like we talked about this self-awareness, it invokes to people when you say consciousness, it invokes the idea of like a human level consciousness.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And if you say like less conscious, you're kind of talking about animals and things. But even though you can draw the line between the two, possibly with integrated information between the photon and human consciousness, they're so dissimilar.
Yeah. That
it's not like it's misleading, because it makes people think that like their lamp is thinking about them.
Yeah.
Or that I don't know, a photon. If it kind of makes people think that there's like this conscious force that's like imbued in everything.
Yes.
And that's absolutely not what it's saying.
Absolutely not. No. At least not in the way that I understand it. Like.
Yeah. Actually, maybe I don't understand.
I don't think it is. No. Like from what I've read and sort of listened to by the people who've put forward this theory.
Yeah.
Like they are trying to get at this idea that all consciousness is a high level of integrated information.
Yes.
And that because anything is possible of transmitting information, then that process that from which consciousness eventually emerges, is everywhere.
Yeah.
And we just happen to exhibit a particularly integrated version of it.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons almost like that's why we said earlier we don't like the word consciousness particularly.
Yeah.
Because it has all this baggage attached to it.
It does.
Which makes it hard to describe things that are what you would consider normally, what most people would consider unconscious.
Yeah, like does that mean my light switch is like thinking about me or something?
And it's not really what they're saying.
No.
That it has anything similar. It's just that it has information. What it really is just talking about is information, the integration of information.
Yeah.
Consciousness is kind of like is what you would normally consider in normal discourse, normal language, common parlance, is that it's a conscious thing is like a real endpoint of integrated information, like an outcome of a highly integrated system,
like vastly more integrated than like anything else. Even like the most advanced like supercomputers have nothing in terms of integration compared to like what mammalian brains have. And other animal brains.
Yeah.
You can imagine like a graph of like this phi thing, and it's just like a flat line,
which you can't see anything.
Which you can't see, which is, I mean, I guess it does have a very shallow like increase.
It's nearly non-zero for ages.
Yeah, nearly just non-zero, whatever, and then just absolutely spikes at the last moment, and that spike at the last moment is like life on Earth basically, and everything else in the universe is like down on the flat end.
Yeah.
Yeah, or life on what other planets possibly.
Yeah, sure.
But what?
So people have used this to sort of say that integrated information theory talks that it posits that there's this like panpsychism thing.
Yes.
That's the word that they use.
Panpsychism, yeah.
As in that the universe is conscious.
Yes.
And that's misleading. It's because of what consciousness. Yeah, because of what consciousness is defined as in integrated information theory. It is basically just a level of integration of information. So, like I said before, it leads people down the road of thinking that there's some kind of human level kind of type conscious experience, but all it's saying really is that things have kind of like a subjective experience, that like even like a photon, and that's kind of what they define as like consciousness, if you like, in this sense,
right?
In that like a photon has its own like position in space and time, and it has information that it set its own information that has come about from it like integrating, or not integrating, but like basically touching or coming into contact with other things, and that have passed information to itself, which means it has like a subjective experience of the universe.
Yeah, so that's unique to it.
Yes, exactly.
Crucially, so like
has information passed to it that is internalized. Yes. And therefore it has kind of like a subjective experience of the universe. And so that's not really the same as like a kind of conscious kind of
it's not
experience
sat there thinking about something.
No, exactly. In the traditional kind of meaning of what people would think consciousness means, all it means is that it's just got its own like internalized subjective kind of part of the universe, subjective experience of the universe.
And once you start building that up into more and more layers and integrate it more and more and more and more and more, you end up with a system that we would recognize as being self-aware, but like crazy, way more complicated.
Yeah, and that's what they mean by panpsychism, is that there's every like little kind of minutiae of the universe, every quanta of it has its own kind of subjective experience. Yeah. So that's what I think they're saying.
Yeah, I think it is, and I like it. I think because and I'll tell you why. It's because what we were talking about last week and a bit earlier about how you can trace back. You can't see a point in human evolution at which consciousness suddenly appears, because there wasn't that point. That point didn't exist. It is a gradational thing, and as I said last week, like all our brains are doing are just centralizing processing of response to stimuli in this highly integrated way. Yeah. And you can trace that all the way back to what bacteria were doing in like the primordial thing, and still do, just responding to stimuli, just like getting some information from the environment, processing that and reacting to it. Yeah. But what this does is take that even further back. Yeah. And just says like,
which is of course true. Of course,
like
a bacteria is just a chemical system that's grown. Yeah. It's very much developed from a.
I mean, it's an error to make a distinction between life and non-life, really, because there's a gradational thing there as well. Yes. There's chemistry that behaves in very complex ways and reacts to stimuli and does stuff like that. So that's, I mean, it's awesome. I really like that aspect of it, actually. Yeah. Which is unusual, which is strange, because that is the bit when I first read about it. That was the bit that I was like, "Whoa, what the hell?" Yeah. But when I thought about it more, like I was like, "Okay, now I think I
really dig that part of it. Yeah. That part really makes sense to me. Yeah. And kind of it's one of those things where you're sort of like, oh yeah, I mean, this just to me just sort of like, it's like they haven't solved it, but it's kind of like, okay, yeah, I can kind of understand like how this might develop. It may morph into something where we truly understand what consciousness is.
And it's cool because...
And it's the right way of thinking about it. That's the correct way to think about it.
I think
definitely is that you have a spectrum of
absolutely
of increasingly complex things. And there's no that it's gradational and that it's that's how you like any chemical evolution of any system. That's how you get closer to understanding the complex behaviours. Understanding all the bits before.
Yeah. Exactly.
So is if we're thinking about all these different things we've talked about, is integrated information kind of is that the one that we're sort of plumbing for at the moment in terms of an explanation for consciousness?
It feels like the most satisfying that I've come across.
Yeah, same to me.
Purely because it doesn't need anything else. Like it's not asking for like an extra like ingredient. It's not asking for like a non-physical kind of weirdness going on.
Yes.
It seems to suggest a way of just explaining exactly like what we're experiencing, just based on information processing.
Exactly.
Which is really cool.
Yeah, it tried to Occam's razor it.
Yeah. And
the whole problem of just like this is it's just integrating things in a certain way.
And I wonder because it's such a new thing. Like obviously it's going to get refined and talked about, and it's obviously making a bit of a splash. So more and more people will probably get starting to work on it and all this kind of stuff.
You will probably see inroads in terms of machine learning that will use integrated information theory to start trying to produce integrated artificial intelligence systems. We'll talk about that a bit more later. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe this will be a key to developing like an artificial intelligence. And actually as well, if we somehow work out that this is true, that like human consciousness does depend on, or it is totally like a function of integrated information, then it might make a way of us being able to like quantify the consciousness of everything. Like from like animals,
give it literally
be like, okay, this is how conscious this thing is. This is how conscious this thing is. And including machines.
Exactly.
So like AI, so it'd be like, okay, is this a conscious AI? Don't worry about the Turing test and all that stuff. Don't need to ask a subjective human like, oh, what do you think about this machine being conscious? You just be like, okay, what's its phi level?
Yeah. And you could potentially do that. Potentially, it'd be incredible to build something like that. Would be you could potentially look at its sort of system of how it works and simply determine from the like blueprint of it essentially if it was integrated enough to be like classed as a conscious entity. Although again, bad use of consciousness. Consciousness is not a good word because it's any level on that spectrum. That's why you give it a number. To give it a phi number, to give it its phi level. You don't have to use the word consciousness then. That's my one problem with integrated information theory is that it should posit that it does posit that consciousness is this integrated information thing, but it should stop using the word, or at least have the word in its title, because saying that everything is conscious is not what most people understand consciousness to be. And it makes it hugely misleading.
It's hugely misleading, I agree.
But yeah, you could I mean a computer that's complex enough to have a phi level near an animal or near us, you probably aren't going to be able to. That type of thing is probably going to evolve on its own, as in you're probably going to give it like self-learning algorithms. It's going to go mental, and then you're going to come back with something and you don't fully understand how it works. For example, the search engine at Google, people don't quite understand like what that thing's doing because it's got so many layers of and so many inputs, and it's learnt so much over the years about how to like perceive images and stuff. Of course they understand like what's gone into it, but it's done so much self-learning away from them that it's beginning to be difficult to really understand what it's doing.
So maybe something like that is already beginning to like raise its like phi level a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
On that spectrum. And also something like when we start seeing much more integration in cities, like so smart cities, whatever they would call it, like with where you have maybe loads of autonomous vehicles that are all networked, and like traffic flows all kind of centralized and all this stuff, and it's like monitoring various aspects of the city. That's going to be start to turn into like a high level of integration. Probably still nowhere near what's going on in human brains.
No, but if you have these self-learning algorithms like that DeepMind have been using to teach it how to beat everyone at that Chinese game Go or whatever it is, it's like incredibly complicated. It's got like like trillions and trillions and trillions of different permutations per like moveset or whatever.
Mental.
And they just taught itself how to do it.
Yeah, it wasn't programmed to do it.
If you have similar self-learning algorithms that you give to a computer to then go away with all the information integrated from a city, not just a board, not just a crappy little like sort of like complex chessboard, but like a full city, it may raise its own file level from the amount of information it's integrating in. Well, we don't know where that sort of thing might lead. These are the kind of fears of AI.
This is going to start convincing me that the singularity is around the corner again.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we'll talk about this when we do an AI episode.
We absolutely will.
But integrated information could be a step along understanding how that could happen, and potentially a step along trying to imbue an AI that we create with some kind of understanding of like human like morality and things and things.
Yeah.
You have to understand the problem is a muddy topic, but you have to understand the functions behind self-awareness of consciousness to start trying to build safely something like an AI. Yeah. And integrated information theory seems to be it's the best stuff I've read so far that I've been like, okay, this is something better than I've seen before. Yeah, it's the most, as I said before, it's the most satisfying explanation or step towards an explanation. Yeah, and although I may have misunderstood it all. Yeah, of course. That is definitely possible. So, if we think about then some of the kind of downstream implications of this. Yeah. If we take integrated information as what consciousness is. Yeah. Does that have any implications for how we perceive some of the problems related to consciousness? So do we have free will? These kinds of things. Does it help answer those questions? Well, so for a start, that's one of the things that a lot of people have like a kind of reaction to is this concept that if the brain is just if consciousness is just an aspect like of the physical world, then it's possible that we could predict exactly what you're thinking and what you'll always think from now on. Therefore, free will doesn't exist. So it's like it's a thing that people some people are a bit not scared's the wrong word, but like they're not comfortable with that idea. Yes. Because of the implications of it. So that's possibly part of the reason why some people prefer like a non-physical explanation. Yeah. So if you take the integration information theory, which is definitely like a physical explanation for consciousness, and you add into the mix the fact that we live in a deterministic universe where everything happens for a reason, like energy transferred from one thing to another, and like there's always a cause and effect. If you put those two things together, what you come up with is this concept that, okay, maybe we can predict, maybe it's possible to predict the future of your own thoughts. So is there such a thing as like free choice and free will? Yes. And this starts to get hard. But, well, integrated information says that these systems themselves, so these highly integrated systems, make kind of internal choices and they sort of engender internal processes that aren't subject to like outside influence in the same way. So if you think of like a brain that has no inputs, that like eyes, so say you somehow make a brain that's just like sat in a tank and all it's got is nutrients going in and out of it to keep it alive and oxygen or whatever. So it's got no like sensory inputs at all. It's got no sensory inputs. Never has done. No. Sure. Okay. Is that brain still? That's an integrated piece of information still? Yeah. Is it conscious? It's still working as a brain. It's still functioning. Is it conscious? Does it? I mean, it's going to have to. So if consciousness is like integrated information, it's going to have to be information. Is going to have to be being transferred in some way through it. Yeah. Like states changing, whatever, like cause and effect happening. Where's that information coming from? Like that's the thing. Like where is it come from? Like is it? So this comes back to the reason this is relevant to the free will thing. Yeah. Is the fact that that sort of the two branches of the argument. One side says that okay,
the brain is just acting out like it's just a consequence of all the like external influences that go in, like transistors are in a computer. Like you know, you give it a command and it executes it. So in the same way, like, okay, you see something, your brain does a thing and it executes a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas the other way of thinking of it is, okay, maybe it's possible for things to happen totally within the brain that are just like the brain's intrinsically affecting its own like decisions. So they're conscious decisions. So you're making decisions, but they're not affected by the outside world.
Yeah.
So that's like the free will part of it, right? So you're not affected by the external environment. So the question is like, could you have a brain that is just disconnected from the external environment? And I'm not sure you can.
But it would still potentially be thinking things though, right? Because like the thing with the brain is that it's got like we say that, so integrated information says that it can have its own like internal integrated like cause and effect things. So the brain can like without external influence kind of make a decision or think about something. And because a brain has like a biological legacy, it may be like imagining some things like encoded into its like the like it might imagine that it has a body like Phantom Pain style kind of like feels that the body is there or not. It may, I mean, who knows?
But these are going to be like sort of, you're talking about like kind of innate like pre-programmed behaviors or pre-programmed thoughts, I guess. Like the fact that a baby can recognize a human face immediately. It doesn't need to be taught it. It just immediately knows what a human face looks like. That's an innate programmed bit of thought.
So what I'm saying is that like all those bits would be in a brain that was in a jar.
It would be, but they're external influences. So they're information that's come into that brain from before, from the external environment. So it's not like an totally intrinsic mechanism. So like the information that's triggered like whatever thought process it's having will have come from outside that brain, extrinsic.
Do you mean the brain in the jar or the child?
The brain in the jar.
Okay,
the brain in the jar.
Yeah,
it's got no inputs at all at that point.
But it has legacy inputs though, right?
It has legacy
that's formed what it was.
Yeah, exactly. And they are essentially like external inputs because they're not external inputs at that moment to that like free will decision that it's making, conscious decision that it's making at that particular moment. Yeah. But the kind of cascade of events that's led it to make that conscious decision can be traced back to whatever information has come into the
you might brain. Find because the brain's developed in a certain way, you might find that actually a brain won't work in that way because you if you take away all these senses, it just becomes like the way it integrates this information. It partly relies on these senses. It may just like turn to mush and be kind of.
It's no longer.
It may just drives itself like insane very like quickly. So if you put all those senses back into it, it would just be like someone who's like almost brain dead kind of level of.
It may need like the external
for the thing to work properly,
for the integration to be built up. But yeah, so this idea that that you can have free will decisions that are totally devoid of any external influence, I feel like that's not realistic.
No, I think that's probably.
I think you can have so far removed from their external influence.
But it's not It's not a zero influence. Like phi is never quite zero.
Exactly.
There's always this kind of like slight like history, maybe part of evolution or something that has had an environmental influence on the way something works and the way like a decision will switch on and off in your head, or a thought or a conceptual thing still have their roots in external processes, but are now like almost entirely internal and integrated and do not interact with the outside world. So to be able to actually predict like a human's like future thoughts, which is probably impossible for another reason, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So to be able to predict them, you would maybe need to know like the position of like every atom in the universe for the entire history of the universe, or something ridiculous like that. To like trace that cascade of events down through the entire biological evolution to those thought processes going on in that head for like the 25 years it's been alive or whatever that's led to that particular point and that decision. So it's a ridiculous amount of abstraction from the external influences. But it still is determined by all those influences. Because the hardware it runs on is externally derived from the conscious.
Yeah, just because our brains are like part of the universe. There's no like separation between.
But you can but essentially still have like a brain that, although it's got all this legacy stuff, it really is like making its own like integrated internal decisions about thoughts about. So in a way, you do have like. Do you have free will?
This is sort of having.
Depends what you define that free will as.
Like you do in the sense that you can make conscious decisions about stuff that
have very little environmental influence to the point where they're way more yours than they are like legacy environmental influences.
Yeah.
But they're absolutely
you in the way you are because.
But they're not totally free. They're never totally.
They're never
free.
totally.
And so there's never really.
To be totally free, like your brain would have to exist like outside of the universe.
Yeah,
I think.
And so free will, it's almost like it partly exists. Maybe
it's a weird concept.
It's a weird thing. I mean, free will's a bad kind of. It's a bit like consciousness again.
It's hard to grasp really.
It's hard to grasp, and it doesn't really mean.
And it has no bearing. I mean, the fact that like everything that you do and think for the rest of your life is the consequence of like a crazy cascade of cause and effect from the beginning of the universe. Yeah. Has no bearing on your life because like obviously no. Like who cares? I mean, there's no way that's ever gonna like. It's not. No one's gonna hand you like a sheet saying like these are what your thoughts are gonna be for the rest of the week. No. Like, no. It's just
you still behave in that way.
It's a ridiculously complex thing.
And it is seemingly according to integrated information or like what I think of integrated information. I think posits that free will is a thing.
Yes.
Because it says that you can have these processes that are internally devoid of or totally departed from the external.
Which is what I'm kind of challenging in a way.
Which I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure I agree with that entirely. I think there's always that non-zero input. Yeah. And therefore free will isn't ever quite free. Mm. But it's an interesting thing, and it'd be good to hear other people's thoughts on it. Yeah. So we think we have kind of some aspects of free will in a sense. Yeah. But we just talked about, you just mentioned that could you therefore, if you don't have free will, if there is this input.
There's always that input. There's always that like cause and effect, like cascade from.
Internal, external cause and effect. Yeah. That the universe is still deterministic in the same way in that. Yeah. From the beginning of the universe till now, if you could model all that accurately, which is insane. Could you predict someone's thoughts and free will and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, could they predict their choices?
Yeah, which basically means would we then live in the world of Minority Report? Yeah, yeah, the answer is probably no.
The answer is probably no.
It's probably impossible, like fundamentally impossible to predict. That kind of level of stuff.
Yeah, and it may be because for one reason I'll just talk about in a second, but that if integrated information does have these kind of internalized kind of features that maybe they're still deterministic though, aren't they?
Yeah, they are still deterministic. Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe because they're. I'm just wondering if you could ever theoretically calculate those internalized processes.
Yeah, sure.
Is it too much
theoretically?
Is it a black box?
I don't see why it would be. If it's deterministic and you know everything about the starting points of that system, like literally everything about it, then you should be able to predict everything that will ever happen to it. I don't just mean the starting points. I mean everything that's going to influence it.
I'm not quite sure what integrated information's thing on determinism. I think it is a deterministic.
I think yeah. I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah. I think it is. But that there was stuff that we were reading about the fact that the like separation of intrinsic like thoughts from so that seemed to be suggesting that whoever wrote that was thinking that it was possible to be like removed from the determinism of the rest of the universe somehow by having these intrinsic.
But that's what I thought it might.
Like, thoughts. So I mean maybe its position, the whole integrated information theory's position on that is
that you couldn't model it because of the way information has to be integrated within itself. Yeah. Anyway,
I'm not sure I agree, but
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Yeah, we kind of covered that just a minute ago.
Yeah. But there's another reason why you couldn't do it. That is much less. You don't need to. It's much easier to understand, basically. Yeah. you could never really. So you talked about the starting conditions you would need to know to predict like the thoughts and feelings, etc., of someone's life, of their choices and stuff. You would need to know in such detail those starting conditions, like by an infinitely divisible amount. To the point where if you put the starting condition of a spatial position of something into a computer, it's going to be always in decimal points in which you have to round up at some point, no matter how many billions of decimal points you go through.
Eventually you're going to get to that one where it's like so this is an estimate now we're down to like a billion decimal points. This last one is an estimate. It's somewhere between that and the next point, so it's somewhere between 0.0 billion zeros 1 and 0 billion zeros 2, somewhere in there. And that rounding error, after you go through the insane amount of like possible like cause and effect things that would go on to,
all
like,
the different starting
conditions.
Brain. Well, if you start all the different starting conditions, when you have all those tiny,
so you make all those estimates.
Roundings.
So then that means that the very next thing that happens, the next step in the chain, you've already diverged from. Well, you've already got like a possible range of possible outcomes from each one of those events. And then from each one of them, then of course you have the next set of rounding errors, and so you have another divergence of possible outcomes. And by the time you get to like the idea that like a human's thought processes, I mean you're just so rapidly diverging from this tree of possibilities is just going to explode out of,
So this is like there's kind of aspects of what's called chaos, so mathematical chaos. So the idea that the starting conditions, the system becomes widely diverges from its initial starting conditions. It's deterministic, as in the starting conditions absolutely govern and the things that happen to it along the way govern the outcome. But it becomes so complicated so quickly that you could theoretically model the sort of thoughts and feelings and choices someone would make, but practically you could never do it, no matter how much computing power you had, because there's always a rounding error.
Exactly. No matter how many, the more computing power, all that's going to do is going to be slightly prolonging that time at which you, or slightly decreasing the level of divergence, I guess, because you're just going to have like a slightly smaller rounding error. That's it. That's all you're going to be able to do. But those rounding errors are going to be infinitely divisible, in the way that, like, even if you like throw a ball, and you have a computer program plot exactly the trajectory of that ball, and predict where it's going to land, it will predict it accurately, very accurately, if it knows everything about the starting conditions. But it's still going to be an approximate landing spot. It's not going to tell you exactly like the spot at which that ball is going to land. So I mean, that's it. That's literally what we're talking about. It's just that it happens that
there's that
you're throwing a trillion balls at a trillion other balls, and they're all going to go and hit a trillion other balls, and you have to know exactly what's going to happen to all of them in order to be able to predict like the simplest part of like a human thought process.
So there's that like two pendulum kind of experiment. What's it called? The two lever something
like that.
It's where you basically nail two bits of wood together. One of them to a pivot at the top, and then another pivot in between. And then you try and lift them up, and you think you have it in the same starting conditions. You pull away the thing, let it drop, and you'll find the shapes it spins in are very different each time, no matter how close you think you are to like getting it to release at the same time, because the shapes that it produces are very, very sensitive to those starting conditions.
And you never get them exactly the same.
And you never get exactly the same, so you end up rapidly running away. It exhibits mathematical chaos. It just basically goes mental. And you would have
there's actually animations like, of that
billions of times over. Trying to predict the realistic kind of choices and stuff that someone would make. So you probably couldn't, even if it was totally deterministic, which integrated information may or may not say it is, but whatever. You still couldn't do it, even if it was.
I mean, it's crazy. Like
even potentially like an infinitely intelligent super AI still couldn't do it.
Well, infinitely intelligent.
As in, it's gone through the intelligent explosion.
It's like a crazy, because
like many orders of magnitude smarter than any human, or all humans that have ever existed.
It might be able to produce,
but it might be able to get very close to it, because it might be able to narrow that so much, its probabilities.
Narrow it so much. And you might find that this is a goal of again, we're going to go into AI stuff, but a goal of like a friendly AI is to kind of to try and like model the moral evolution of humanity, and just kind of work out what humans are gonna want to do in the future. That's that coherent extrapolated volition thing, which we'll maybe try and talk about in another episode.
Yeah, we don't worry too much about that now.
But and that's again going to be like one of these highly chaotic things where like it depends on not just like predicting one human's brain, but predicting like the collective consciousness of
just
a whole.
Insane.
And that's going to be diverging into like a huge like possibility space that's going to diverge very quickly from. So having a super intelligent, super high processing power computer AI will be very good at narrowing that, but it's not going to remove all the uncertainty. It's impossible to remove the uncertainty.
No, exactly. So even it probably couldn't get it right. After a certain amount of time, it's going to have diverged, no matter how good it is at reducing those probabilities.
Yeah. So probably. Don't worry, your free will is safe
from prediction. The minority report is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, no one's going to be able to read. No one can read your mind, your future thoughts. So you're safe from that. Thanks, chaos. So I think that kind of wraps it up for consciousness. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that we haven't covered.
Yeah, there is. Obviously. I mean, there's loads of different like opinions of some of these facts, and we have some of the stuff we've been talking about. We haven't really gone too much into the sort of non-physical theories about it.
No.
There are like a variety of them if you want to go and look them up.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think that's a useful way of thinking about it particularly, but that's we can't do every opinion out there because otherwise we'd be here for
exactly.
Hours. It'd be boring as hell.
And plus we've got to save some stuff for future episodes. We'll probably return to consciousness when we talk about AI and all kinds of other stuff. So and
we've already talked about it a little bit in terms of animal differences.
Yeah. So for now, I think we're gonna that'll round it up nicely.
So let's just do a quick Nutters of the Week.
A quick one.
I've got a cheeky Nutters of the Week for you.
Sounds good.
So I was looking up some ghost stories from around the world.
Yeah.
And there are some pretty good ones. There's some pretty funny ones.
Oh, great.
There's one in Japan called the Shrimi.
Right.
Okay. So this, and you could use this as an idea for a costume if you want at some point. You don't want to. So basically, it's a Japanese ghost story, and it tells the tale of a samurai warrior that walks around Kyoto, and basically what this ghost does is it walks up to people naked, okay, bends over, shows them his ass, and it's got like an eyeball sticking out of its ass.
Oh, what? What? Is this like an old like traditional? Japanese...
some sort of Japanese ghost story that they pass around.
But why? Like what's that about?
I don't know.
How does this evolve? Like how does this come to be?
It's pretty good.
Is there like
another Japanese ghost story related? Is that this like woman with very large breasts comes round and like gets her breasts. The breasts are on the back of her for some reason, right. And she's like a terrifying like old hag, and tries to put her breasts on you. So bizarre.
This like taps into the kind of like national like paranoia or something of Japan.
I just think it's just old stories, but you would not want that.
Man.
There's other stories I was reading about like
bizarre. It's
people
like
thinking like fetuses come around and like steal your wallet and stuff.
Ugh.
All these other like bizarre ghosts.
These are like pretty nightmarish.
Dark. Yeah.
Reminds me of something out of like Pan's Labyrinth or something. But
exactly.
Yeah,
very much. There's some great ghost stories out there. All sorts of ones about like headless mules coming to attack people, and all kinds of just like odd little tidbits.
I love these like old weird like national tradition kind of stories.
Yeah,
it reminds me that there's that one. It's not really a ghost story, but there's like a Christmas tradition in Catalonia and Barcelona and stuff called like I can't remember the name of it. It's a Catalan like word.
Sure.
It means like father poo or something like that.
What?
Maybe no, or like Uncle Poo or something like that. And it's literally like you have like a log that's meant to be like a big poo, and you fill it with presents and like put a face on it and stuff.
What?
And like you hit it with sticks and presents, and it poos presents out. No, it's a log that poos like that shits out presents. And like if you go to Barcelona at Christmas, there's stuff about this everywhere, and you can buy little statues of like people like shitting and stuff, and it's like it's weird. It's really weird. It's just like a totally like Catalonian thing.
That is so bizarre.
And it's just totally normal to them. And like they have a Christmas tree, and then next to the Christmas tree they have this like Uncle Pooh, whatever it's called. That,
like
shit
Mr. Hanky.
presents. Yeah, Mr. Hanky,
The Christmas Pooh.
Yeah.
Do you reckon that's where they got it?
Maybe.
From?
But yeah, it's another. It's not a ghost story, but it's these weird like.
That is bizarre.
I mean, we've got plenty of weird national traditions.
Of course we have. Yeah, of course we have. But that doesn't mean it's not funny to look at everyone else's.
Oh yeah. It's just funny and interesting and good.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
I think that's it for now.
Done. Tick.
Consciousness done.
Episode 11 finished.
Yes.
Next week, stuff will happen.
Some stuff. I don't know what. But anyway, thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
As ever.
Yeah.
And let us know what you think about consciousness, what you think it might, whether we got stuff wrong, right, whether integrated information is a good kind of way to look at it. Maybe you think it's a bad way to look at it. Let us know.
Yeah.
And we will continue the quest for knowledge next week.
We'll try. See you later.
See you later.